this involvement with the church seems to have led to you noticing, being privy to the involvement of U.S. intelligence in these obscure Orthodox churches.
Sure.
At a certain point, you were actually asked by someone in the military to spy on other people in your church?
I'm not quite sure if military is the right word. It's kind of murky and ambiguous.
Okay.
I'll give you a little bit of the background on this. After the Kennedy funeral, as we were leaving the church, we ran into a couple of people who were dressed oddly and appeared to be people sort of similar to us. And they just asked us a few questions about what church we represented, etc. And they gave us a few brochures from their own church. They wanted to introduce themselves to us and wanted us to go visit them, and their church was in the Bronx also. So we decided we would check them out. And we went to the church. It was on 183rd Street and Arthur Avenue in the Bronx at that time. It's not there anymore. And it was a beautiful little building. And it was the headquarters of something called the American Orthodox Catholic Church, AOCC.
Mm-hmm.
And we became involved with them. We visited them on one Sunday. We hung out with them for a while. They had no clue that we were younger. We were under 21. They thought, with all of our robes and all of the knowledge that we had acquired, that we were at least in our 20s. This led to a kind of a contretemps later, but at the moment, everything was fine. We went along swimmingly in this relationship. And the head of that church, of the AOCC, was a man called Profeta, Walter Profeta, sometimes Vladimir Profeta. And he boasted of his relationships with U.S. intelligence. Now I'm only 17, 18 years old at this time.
And this is the American Orthodox Catholic Church is neither a normal Catholic church nor a normal Orthodox church, is it?
Yeah, you could say it's neither American nor Orthodox, but Profeta himself was a Ukrainian. He was a priest in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is a legitimate denomination. And for reasons that are too long probably to go into here, he left the Ukrainian church and started this American Orthodox branch. There's a lot of background history to it, and it goes on and on, but basically the short form is he started his own church and became the bishop of his own church, and eventually the patriarch of his own church. So he gave himself a lot of titles. But as a Ukrainian, he was a dedicated anti-communist. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was his raison d'etre was fighting communism. And he had been on television a number of times trying to alert the American people to the dangers of communism. He was a specialist in promoting the news about the Katyn Forest massacre, which the Soviets had instigated, killing a lot of Ukrainian people and burying them in ditches and all that sort of thing. So he was a prominent anti-communist. And he showed me once a letter that he received from Thomas Dewey, promising him he would be the White House chaplain when Dewey won the presidency. So remember, Dewey was running against Truman,
right.
And Profeta was packing his bags that night thinking that Dewey had won, and he was getting ready to become the chaplain. And of course, Truman won, and he was out. So that was going on, and then every once in a while, people would show up at the church in, black wingtips and white shirts and black ties, and they would go into Profeta's office and have little meetings in there. And Profeta would openly boast that on his board of directors he had one FBI agent and one CIA agent. So he told me all of this, and I carefully paid attention to it and filed it away. Little did I know the extent of his operation until years later when I began to read the declassified Kennedy assassination files and find out that the AOCC was kind of prominent, at least in Jim Garrison's mind, when he was conducting his investigation in New Orleans. Because David Ferry belonged to it, Jack Martin belonged to it. A lot of the supposed co-conspirators in the Kennedy assassination were members of the AOCC. They were not just lay members, they were bishops, priests and bishops of the church. Wow. So I conducted investigations later, as late as 5 years ago or so, meeting some of these bishops who were still alive and having correspondence with them and interviewing them, and it's a wild story. It's unbelievably strange. Profeta had managed to get Hoover to give him a kind of, I don't know what you would call it, a kind of blessing to start the church, and he was using the FBI security people to check the references of people who wanted to become bishops in his church. mean, it was a very incestuous relationship between the AOCC and the FBI. The AOCC was used to move agents into and out of the country, even when I was there. During the Biafran Civil War in Nigeria, we had a bishop, a so-called bishop, come in from Nigeria to be consecrated a bishop in New York by Profeta and sent back into Nigeria. Could never figure what that was all about. But this bishop was the anti-Biafran forces. He represented the nationalist forces, you know. So wherever there was a good side or a bad side, Profeta was always on the bad side of any conflict. You know, so I met this guy myself. I mean, I was there at the airport to welcome him into the country, and his name was Aluya, but it was Holy Prophet Aluya. That was his name. So in his ordination or consecration documents, he's there as Bishop H.P. Aluya. You know, Bishop Holy Prophet Aluya. I mean, I wasn't even sure if this guy was Christian. I think he was bishop in the church. There was always an intelligence angle to everything Profeta was doing. There was always some weird agenda. There were always some strange people coming in and going out. And as I found out later, the AOCC was still involved as late as the Serbian and Kosovo crisis. I mean, there's members of the church that I knew back in the 1960s who were involved in running guns and laundering money for some of the Serbian war criminals. So, you know, they've been around for a long time, and they always seem to be involved in something intelligence related, and always on the anti-communist or the right wing or fascist side.
Someone from the government contacted you trying to get you to spy for them?
Well, it wasn't like that. What happened was, one of the whole reasons for this church and everything else, of course, was to give us a kind of a shield where the draft was concerned. And as long as we were conducting services, as long as we were behaving as clergymen and doing what we could, it was a legitimate shield. But we still had to have the imprimatur of the selected service people in order to make sure we weren't drafted. And what we had to do was go to the head of selective service in New York City. And I had a meeting with him, with another clergyman of this American Orthodox Catholic Church of the AOCC. We had a meeting with the head of the selective service operation of that selective service system in New York City, a colonel. He had the rank of colonel in the army, I suppose, but he wore civilian clothes. And very sort of John, or let's say Alan Dulles appearance, you know, patches on the elbows, a tweed jacket, mustache, and pipe. And he sat there and he gave me the 4D status, which is the ministerial deferment, right there. But normally you don't get that from the head of selective service, right? It's something that's processed through paperwork.
Right.
But this was done face to face, and there was an understanding, you know, that we're all in this thing together, and that the Orthodox churches are somewhat suspect. You know, some of the Russian churches were running spies into the U.S. from Moscow.
Oh.
We knew this. This was even covered in the newspapers at the time.
Okay.
So there was this understanding there was going to be a quid pro quo. So
for you to spy on other clergy for the government,
right,
in exchange for your draft
for my
deferment.
status, for my deferment, right.
Okay. And so, did you actually do this for a while? Did you report?
Well, there was nothing to report.
Okay.
You know, it was all sort of stupid. I mean, we would go to the Russian Orthodox Church because we were trying to form relationships with other Orthodox churches